Winter is coming. Well, actually, in a few minutes. This installment of BCO Sundays at 3 features Winter, the fourth and final violin concerto in Vivaldi's set of 4 concertos called The Four Seasons. This is a memorable performance by concertmaster Audrey Wright leading the Baltimore Chamber Orchestra. Our thanks and kudos go to BCO assistant conductor Rebecca Smithorn for her fabulous, entertaining, and informative introductions to these concertos. So here, once more with feeling, is Rebecca.
Welcome back to BCO Sundays at 3. We've been talking about Vivaldi and his landmark work, The Four Seasons. Now, The Four Seasons has become such a staple of classical music that most people don't realize that all of Vivaldi's works, including The Four Seasons, were totally unknown until they were rediscovered in the 1930s. And it was actually J.S. Bach, the most famous of Baroque composers, who gave researchers their first clue. You see, one of Bach's earliest biographers, J.N. Forkel, wrote in 1802, "He soon began to feel that all was not right, that order, coherence, and interrelatedness must be brought to the ideas, and that some form of instruction was needed to the attainment of this end." Vivaldi's violin concertos, which had just appeared, served this purpose for him. He studied the treatment of the ideas, their mutual relationship, the pattern of modulation, and many other features. So we have a picture of Bach working intuitively at his keyboard and feeling like his own music isn't cohesive, like it's not well structured. And to fix this, he studies the work of a composer that he admires, Antonio Vivaldi, who was only 7 years his senior. And people who were interested in Bach eventually said, "Wait a second, who's this Vivaldi guy?" So there was a slow trickle of scholarship throughout the 19th century leading up to World War I, when a newfound Italian patriotism led people to dive deeper into the music of Italy's own composers. And here the journey of Vivaldi's works takes a long and wild turn in a story that involves a pair of brothers, a divided inheritance, and a collection of manuscripts tucked away in a monastery. And in the end, 2 wealthy Italian businessmen put forward the cash to make Vivaldi's manuscripts available to researchers at the National Library in Turin in 1930. And it was only then, after 1930, that Vivaldi's works, including The Four Seasons, were once again played and heard. That's nearly 200 years after his death. But they quickly became as popular in the 20th century as they were in the 18th. The Four Seasons has shown up in everything from episodes of The Simpsons to BMW commercials to ubiquitous cell phone rings. And of course, it is rightfully loved by audiences everywhere. It's imaginative, it's tuneful, and it's just a delight to listen to. So then what happened? How could such a powerhouse composer be totally forgotten for 2 centuries? In our last video, we talked about Vivaldi's run-in with church authorities over his unconventional lifestyle as a priest. And after the scandal in Ferrara, his career started to decline, although that's not the only reason. Vivaldi's works were just going out of style. And in Venice, there was a steady influx of tourists wanting the newest, coolest art. A visitor to Venice writes about Vivaldi, "He is an old man with a mania for composing. To my great astonishment, I have found that he is not as well regarded as he deserves in these parts, where everything has to be fashionable, where his works have been heard for too long, and where last year's music no longer brings in revenue." With work drying up in Venice, Vivaldi traveled to Vienna, tongue twister, to supervise productions of some of his operas. But shortly after the trip, Austrian Emperor Charles VI died unexpectedly after eating poisoned mushrooms on a hunting trip. Yes, that innocent-looking little mushroom. He should have Googled it. And to make matters worse, his only heir was a 23-year-old daughter named Maria Theresa. With their empire dismantled by a mushroom, the Viennese were in no mood for entertainment, and all the opera houses shut down. So the bad luck rippled outward, as it tends to do, and Vivaldi was left in a foreign city once again short on cash. And that situation may have sent his health over the edge. He died in Vienna in July of 1741 at the age of 63. One Venetian historian wrote, "Father Don Antonio Vivaldi, known as the Red Priest, an excellent performer on the violin and a much admired composer of concertos, once earned over 50,000 ducats, but through excessive prodigality died a pauper in Vienna." A tasteful obituary if ever I've heard one. So between being in the wrong place at the wrong time and the disposable nature of Venice's music scene, Vivaldi's life and work were pretty much wiped from music history for a few centuries. But lucky for us, not forever. And just as we reach the end of Vivaldi's journey, we also reach the end of the four seasons with winter. And it is freezing. One of the interesting shifts in the poetry and the captions of this concerto is that they're all in the first person. All the previous concertos, if you remember, described something out there, shepherds or villagers or birds or animals. In winter, Vivaldi depicts pure physical sensations, not scenes. It's as if the cold is so paralyzing we can't think about anything but our own shivering. And Vivaldi and his listeners had direct experience with this. In the winter of 1708, the Great Frost descended on Europe and temperatures plummeted to their coldest in 500 years. Sailors died from the cold while still on ships, famine devastated the continent, and in Vivaldi's Venice, the canals froze over. This painting by 18th century artist Gabriele Bella is called Venice's Frozen Lagoon of 1708. That's less than 10 years before Vivaldi wrote The Four Seasons. So this extreme winter was no doubt still lodged in the memory of Vivaldi and his audience. In the first movement, he just portrays the feeling of freezing your butt off. He gives us shivering and chattering teeth. He even gets into intense little details like stomping your feet on the ground to try to warm them up with these thumpy bass line figures. In the second movement, he describes the feeling of sitting contentedly by the fire as it rains outside. The violins pluck our raindrops, and our soloist floats contentedly above it. And according to the poem, this isn't just sitting by the fire, but doing it while the rain outside drenches 100 others. Remember back in the fall, we were out drinking and dancing and hunting together. In winter, we sit inside alone while all those fools get drenched. Remember, for Vivaldi, summer and winter aren't just darker, they're also more isolated. And we see that perfectly illustrated in the third movement. Here, Vivaldi is painting the feeling of carefully, cautiously making your way across ice. And that's a feeling all Venetians must have known in getting across those frozen canals. He starts with solo violin, all alone, slipping and sliding over just a single bass note. And then we lose our footing even more and gravity wins. In Vivaldi's musical imagination, that is the sound of your backside hitting the ice. After a treacherous and obviously uncomfortable path, Vivaldi finishes the entire Four Seasons with the line, "This is winter, but a kind that brings joy." but the music is still in the minor key. It's not what many people would hear as joyful music. So what do you make of that? Did Vivaldi really think of that as a joyous ending? Was he being deliberately ambiguous or ironic? Was he just throwing a line of poetry on the end to get the thing out the door? That will always be an intriguing mystery. Vivaldi's Winter is icy, solitary, but not without joy, however ambiguous it might be. So get cozy and enjoy this sparkling performance of Winter with Audrey Wright and Baltimore Chamber Orchestra. on this journey through the four seasons together. I have really enjoyed sharing this remarkable music with you. Now I'm handing off BCO Sundays at 3 to Jonathan Polewski, classical voice of WBJC, whose entertaining performances will celebrate the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. Tune in for the first video on Sunday, November 8th, to explore the first movement of Beethoven's Eroica Symphony with a fantastic performance by Baltimore Chamber Orchestra and our own music director, Markand Thakar. We'll see you there.